Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. I'm also recording this at home, like the others in this latest series, so if you hear the sounds of family life and children screaming, I apologise, but we'll just kind of plough on through it. My guest this week is an actor, screenwriter, director, consultant. He's perhaps best known as an actor from Eastenders, but David Proud has had a wide-ranging career, and right now he's got a short film out that he has made. And David, hello, perhaps you can begin by just telling us about that.
Yeah, it's a short film called Verisimilitude, and it's about a young aspiring disabled actress who hasn't had the opportunity to get the job that she wanted. So she's having to teach this really obnoxious non-disabled actor how to play disabled as he's trying to kind of win an award, inevitably aiming for that kind of Oscar or BAFTA. And we see it through her eyes and how hard it can be to be so close to a job that you would love to do, and kind of all the nuances of disability representation. So it was a really lovely job to be able to do and a story to bring to life. And I think it's a really topical conversation for something that needs to be talked about a little bit more.
Was it born from your own experience?
Yes, yeah. Justin Edgar, who wrote it, I've worked with him in various different roles, and he kept saying to me, he said, I've got this little thing I'm working on, and we kept talking about it, and he was observing different things that had happened to me over the years. And then by the time he actually came to wanting to do it, he said, would you be interested in directing it? And I just thought, with the experiences that I've had, I'd be able to kind of really bring that to the forefront. And Ruth was always in our mind to get to play it, and she really plays it lovely. So, and for her, I was the first disabled director that she'd ever had. So it's quite an interesting piece for her, and the dynamic of being directed by somebody also in a wheelchair.
Ruth Madeley has most recently, I guess, been really famous in Years and Years. She's a brilliant actress.
She's amazing. She's really going from strength to strength. And I think it's kind of what we've needed is disabled people in quite high profile shows, and sometimes with the disability not even referenced. I think that Ruth's really carving out that little kind of route that we've always known has been needed. So it's really interesting to see where she's going to go on to next.
I mean, all the characters except Ruth's in that film are pretty awful. They're not likable, are they?
No.
I mean, is that what it's ever been like for you in a situation like that, where you just look around and everybody is a bit of a dick?
We were having this really good conversation last week, actually, because Ruth said that she didn't feel like she felt so much more relaxed on set knowing it was a disabled director. And I said, I've always felt like the jobs I've had to do, there's been some kind of educating the people around me involved. And it's interesting that we've, in that situation, she didn't feel like she was going to have to, apart from just doing the job, explain to people why something wasn't appropriate or why something would be better done a different way. She was able just to be in the moment and be the actress. There is that added anxiety when you get a job and you feel like you're going to have to explain to the producer why that particular thing wouldn't happen or why you need that particular thing. If it paints a picture of the people around her not really understanding her, then that is pretty accurate to how it can be sometimes.
Not understanding and not caring.
Yeah, I think there's a genuine feeling that people want to do the right thing, but sometimes they don't actually want to ask you about it. They don't want to ask you or engage you because sometimes that conversation is a little bit uncomfortable. So I've had projects where, my very first job, they hired a massive ramp to get everyone into the makeup truck. It cost thousands, but, I turned up and they were so pleased to show me this ramp. Oh, we've got this massive ramp that they'd hired. And I was like, that's great, but the makeup artist could just come down and do our makeup down here, surely. So, there's a lot of times where people will try and second guess what you need, and actually it's not what you need, and it goes too far. So it's to try and encourage people to engage with disabled artists, because there's quite a lot of myths that it's going to cost thousands of pounds to have disabled people on set. And it's
Just in terms of language, I mean, you use disabled and disability. There's a character in your film who says handicapped,
yeah,
which I presume you find offensive in some way.
yes,
But there are people who say we shouldn't say disabled either. I mean, I remember covering the
Yeah.
Paralympics and getting a memo saying don't say disabled, say non-disabled
yeah.
for able-bodied people, as we would then have called them. So where are you on language?
It gets to the very heart of the problem because the disabled community is very fractured on that very matter of how we define ourselves, how we describe ourselves. And I think that while we're kind of all arguing about the right way to be referenced, we miss the bigger arguments. And everyone has a different take on it. I'm happy with disabled. I do feel like the world around me is disabling, and I'm quite aware of the definition, that my disability in the right circumstances can be less. If I'm put in a world where everything is kind of ramped and there's equal access to everything, my disability becomes as irrelevant as asthma. So there's disabling factors in my environment, but at the end of the day, I'm comfortable with disabled. But what I loved in your intro is that you described me as an actor and you didn't put disabled in front of it. And recently I've been really struggling with, I think on my website it says disabled actor, disabled writer, and should I tag that label to myself is something that I'm currently, trying to work out in my head. And, should I stop saying that? Should I just say actor, writer, and consultant? So it's
You definitely should, shouldn't you? I mean, that seems a no-brainer to me. That would be like me saying, describing myself as a Asian origin television journalist.
Yes,
or
because
a black and minority ethnic, television journalist.
Yeah, you kind of feel like you're flagging it up front.
It's kind of obvious, isn't it, to anyone who looks? So,
but I think I kind of came into the industry where the disability was the reason why I was in the industry. I was playing a disabled part. I was cast as, so it was my niche. So of course you kind of flag up your niche, but you don't have bald people say, I'm a bald actor. I'm a bald, so I think that it's a thing this year that's going to go. I'm going to start dropping that label because I think that the work that I've done should now be able to kind of speak for itself in terms of what I like to explore and the stories and the areas that I like to delve into.
You started acting in your 20s, didn't you? I mean,
Yes.
did you grow up wanting to be an actor, but
Yeah,
being afraid to do it? Or
I did. I looked at TV and there just wasn't any disabled actors at all. At the time, there was a disabled character in Emmerdale that was played by a non-disabled actor. And I remember writing a quite stinking letter saying, why don't we ever see Chris Tate getting out of his car? Can we just see how he transitions into a wheelchair, because it's such an easy thing to show. So when I went into Eastenders, I purposely asked them, I said, can we stage a scene where I'm doing a scene and I'm also getting in my car? Because you need to show the everyday kind of life of disability, and they were able to do that, which was really nice. But yeah, there wasn't that many people to kind of go, I want a career like that. It was an open audition for a wheelchair basketball drama. I played wheelchair basketball and I'd studied drama at school, and I thought I'd go along to it. And then from 200 people, it was like X Factor. It kept getting a smaller group. And then I was in a group of 20, and it suddenly became quite real and a little bit nerve-wracking. But I managed to get one of the lead parts in a children's drama, and that was it. And I then thought, on the back of that, I'm going to go off and be this actor and, have this amazing career. And then you do that and then don't work for a few months. So, but it's been quite a journey of about 14 years now. And so I think inevitably I had a lot more to say. So that's why I wanted to kind of move into the writing and and getting behind the camera, because it can change the world. You can change perceptions of people and people's ideas of something by putting it on TV. 2 million people see something, and if 10% of them, their view of disability changes, then that's huge. So it was that.
What gives you that faith that you can change the world? I mean, are there things that you think have changed the world that make you think that?
I never realised, really, I wasn't conscious of it, but I grew up watching a lot of civil rights films. One of my favourite films of all time is Philadelphia, and it was just such a hard-hitting film made in a time when no one really wanted to talk about it. And I think that spurred me on to go, if you can make art like that, and if you can make something that also says something, even while you're entertaining people, if you can also make some kind of subtle commentary on the world, it goes in. People respond to it, especially with comedy as well. If you can make people laugh, I often, when I bang my foot, I say ow. I can't feel my foot, and it drives my wife crazy. She's like, can you stop saying ow? It's like a social etiquette. You bang your foot, you say ow. So the more things like that I can convey to make people giggle, it just brings barriers down, I think, and it just normalizes disability.
I mean, so go back to childhood, which is what I was trying to sort of hint at before. I mean, in terms of what you grew up watching, what you grew up thinking you would be. What were your dreams as a kid?
Well, my mum and dad moved us to a bungalow while I could still walk, because they could kind of see what was coming. But I was at primary school, and I had a little waddle. I looked like a penguin when I walked, but I was walking around with these massive leg splints on, and but they obviously could tell what was on the cards, and that I would need to go into a wheelchair. And I think there was.
So how old were you then?
Kind of the end of primary school, and it was a little bit. Well, we had a local charity actually that a gentleman called John Norday in a wheelchair, who's now a vicar, is one of the only disabled vicars in the UK. He came round in his wheelchair, drove up to the house, got out of his car, came into my living room in his wheelchair. He tilted the wheelchair to one side and took the wheel off while he was still sitting in it, and put the wheel back on. And he said, "Hey, come play wheelchair basketball." And my mind was just blown, because I hadn't even got to the point of thinking that I would be able to drive. Obviously, my parents were probably worried about what the future looked like for me. And through going into wheelchair basketball, actually, and entering into that world, it put me on a path that I really needed. And it wasn't just about the sport. It's about the fact of, you turn up at wheelchair basketball, and the amount of times parents would push somebody in a wheelchair in, and then by the time they go to leave, the kid's going, no, I'm going to push myself out, because you didn't get any quarter at all. No one would help you out. You'd have a coach go, pick that ball up, sprint over there, do this, do that. And if you've lived in a world where you've been kind of a little bit protected in a bubble, suddenly you're being pushed and told, well, no, they can do it, so you can do it. And it's liberating.
So when were you first aware that you had something that was degenerative, that you were going to get worse?
It was at primary school, because the weight of my upper half was just, I was getting less and less able to be able to kind of walk different places. And one of the most kind of emotional things is my dad went out and brought like the most expensive pair of Nike football boots at the end of primary school, and I was the goalie by then because I couldn't even run. But it's just like those magic moments in life when I remember him kind of lacing up my boots to kind of go and stand in goal. And I think what was lovely is that then we soon transitioned to my dad driving me to wheelchair basketball games. and and getting all the chairs set up, and he even kind of played in some of the matches as well. So I think when you've got a disability you're born with, it's a gradual change, and that's sometimes easier than if you acquire a disability, because overnight your identity changes. And this is what's really important about disability, is that it can happen. Being disabled can happen to anyone at any time, and it can be an overnight thing. So I think that when it comes to issues about disability, it should be on the consciousness of everybody, even if you have no particular experience of disability, because at any point it can affect you.
But I mean, you make it sound like you were very comfortable with what was happening to you and who you were from a very young age. Is that right, or did you struggle with it?
I had to mature very quickly. I had 2 very big spine operations, and I definitely had my moments where you go through the kind of why me kind of thing. So I've not been without the moments of being really down. Even now, I'll deal with those inside the house, and the minute I go out the house, it's you smile and you kind of deep breath and you kind of go out there. But it goes through waves. You do have times where I think if you have a run of bad luck and things happening, it does get you down a little bit more, and you can kind of spiral. But it's having that moment to pick yourself back up. There's just been a beautiful speech actually by John Boyega that he's just done, and he said where black people are reminded about moments where they've been reminded that they're black by other people, and it's beautiful speeches just done. But there's been moments in my time where I've been reminded by other people that I'm disabled, and in those moments they take your breath away sometimes, and you're not expecting them at times. And I think you would be inhuman if they didn't take a toll in some way.
What's your advice to parents? I ask because I'm involved in a charity, in a muscular dystrophy charity, so I meet a lot of parents of boys, particularly young boys, who've got Duchenne muscular dystrophy and whose muscles are degenerating, and they're all coming to terms with what's happening to them, and how these boys who are often still walking or living relatively normal childhoods are going to be in wheelchairs. And I see the struggle that a lot of them really go through. What's the way to deal with it as a parent?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it's harder for the parent, because the parent would do anything that it was them and not the child going through it. But I think it's the child's journey, and they're on a journey, and there will be highs and lows. But I mean, my mum was quite keen to shield me from certain things. She said I probably shouldn't be able to go scuba diving, or I shouldn't really get a tattoo because of my because of all the kind of bloods and stuff. So she was. My mum was a very typical mum in the fact of, she was trying to protect me, but they also tried to just let me find my way and explore things. But even though it scared the life out of them, it has been hard for them to know when to step in and to support, and when to step back and just, and I think even into adulthood now, I know that, I could ring them and they're kind of around the house. Before I've even finished a phone call, my dad would be knocking on the door, coming to do a light fitting and stuff. So for the parents as well, they just need to look after themselves, because disability is never a diagnosis of one person. It doesn't matter what the disability is, it's a diagnosis on an entire family.
I mean, you mentioned that speech by John Boyega on the march. How have you been affected by watching that? I mean, do you identify with people who feel marginalised, discriminated against from different groups?
100%. I think that the mechanics of discrimination are exactly the same, but I think that the application of the discrimination and the prejudice is is obviously different. I mean, you talk about very direct discrimination that, and people fearing for their lives. And I think the disability community is probably more affected by indirect discrimination in terms of the support structures and the things around that we then have to fight to say that's actually discriminatory and that's wrong. Whereas I think that, what's happening in America is not only the indirect discrimination that clearly there is amongst the kind of the government, but there's also the very real direct discrimination. And but yeah, there is that deeper empathy of just struggle.
I mean, do you think that disabled people do suffer the same way at all? In that, obviously, that there are white people who hate black people because of the colour of their skin and want to do them harm.
Yeah.
Do you think there are people who hate disabled people and want to do them harm in the same way?
Even though the mechanics are the same, I think that you have to. They're two very separate things in the way that they're manifesting, and I think that to try and kind of understand them all together can sometimes be very difficult because it dilutes the individuality of what's happening. But I think that there's a misconception of disability that it's all benefits and people are taken care of, and I think that in times of depression and kind of and recession, people do start to question, why do disabled people have this car? Why did it? So, and I think that those things and those misconceptions can lead to a rise of disability hate crime. But I think that the disabled community, from what I know as well, we had the Disability Discrimination Act, and then it was kind of amalgamated into the Equalities Act, and people were really a little bit annoyed because it kind of then diluted down the individual nuances of the Disability Discrimination Act. So I think while we should appreciate that, equality is just something that we should be fighting for everybody, and acknowledge the fact that, you can have a deeper understanding if you feel like you've been kind of oppressed at times, or if you feel like you've not been heard, or you feel like you're people with disabilities that have had support structures taken away will be fearing for their life, so these are very real feelings, but we should give, I think, each one its own gravitas in terms of understanding that what one community needs is not the same as what another community needs, but we actually need to we need to dial into all of those areas. It's the same thing about what they were saying about feminism. It's not a female thing. It's something for everybody. I think equality is something that everybody should. Yeah, it's you either get it or you don't.
What did you grow up thinking you were going to do with your life? And was academic work any harder as a result of being disabled, or were you able to just get on with it?
I was told that I was going to go to a different school that was a school for disabled people, and I wanted to go to the same school that my sister did. So I fought to go to a mainstream school, and I kind of always knew. When I did, there's an old cranky computer at school where you put in everything you liked, and it kicked out your ideal job, and mine came as bricklayer because I said I liked being outdoors. So it's like, so I was quite at that point at the end of secondary school, I kind of knew that what I was going to do was going to have to be using my brain in some way, and to try and be academic. But I never believed that I could act because I just didn't see it, even though I kind of did the courses at school. So to be able to be creative is actually different. I still use my brain in terms of writing, and I like that. But I never thought I'd be being as creative as I am.
How did Eastenders come about?
It came about through audition. I'd done Secret Diary of a Call Girl, which is something you never think that you're going to do as a disabled actor, but it was beautifully written, and I'd gone and done that, and then I got an audition to go in, and my friend Jason actually tipped me off because he said the casting director I was going in to meet only casts the regulars, so I kind of went in there a little bit more armed, knowing that because they said it was just a guest episode part, and he was like, no, she, she just does the regulars. So I went in there and I just had to be as evil and snotty and horrible as I could, and I kind of loosely based a character on somebody I knew who would instantly go into a room and make people aware of his disability. Like the minute he could say the word cripple, he would. He would just kind of. So he felt
just
like,
to make people feel uncomfortable.
Yes, just so he had that power dynamic of feeling like he was in control. So I loosely based a character on that, and yeah, managed to be the snottiest person that went in there. And the exec producer at the time, Diedrich Santa, was just lovely, and I'm still in contact with him now. And it was just, you suddenly go to that next level of people wanting to know where you live, who you're dating, where and that they try and prepare you for that, but nothing can really prepare you. And Adam Woodgett said, have you tried wearing putting a baseball cap on or something? But really and truly, being in a wheelchair, there was no way people, unless I literally sat in a different wheelchair to go out, people were going to know it was me. So that was really weird to get my head around. Actually being hounded in places and stuff. I was used to people looking at me because of my disability and staring, but then I suddenly didn't know whether they were staring because the disability or because they recognised me from Eastenders, which then puts you in a really awkward kind of not knowing how to handle these people.
And do you find that a lot of people just think that you are the person?
Yeah, I got people coming up saying, "Why are you so mean to Charlie?" And why? How are you getting on?
But do they mean it, or are they?
Yeah, they genuinely mean it. And I had people coming up saying, "How are you getting on at university?" Because the character was at university. I was like, I'm not really there. But there are some lovely fans that just kind of get it, and but it's just really weird mix of queuing up for public toilets and having people want to shake your hand as they're coming out, and you're going, you've just been to the toilet. I don't really want to shake your hand right now. So it's the whole different world of weird, but great at the same time.
And having gone through that, how much work was there? How much work is there?
Actually, on the show to do.
No. I mean, sort of out there in the world of television, drama, and film. If you're in a wheelchair, how much work is there?
Not as much as there should be, and this is the essence of what we're trying to do with the film, is to say there needs to be equal opportunity. There needs to be more parts for disabled people. I mean, I'm talking 10 years ago for EastEnders, and that was a struggle. It was a good 9-10 months before my next job.
But do you want the parts to be for disabled people, or do you want to be more easily able to just go for the same parts as anybody else?
You have to be able to do. Yeah, you have to be able to do both, because there's stories, disability stories out there that are so vital to be told, that they deserve an outlet and they deserve to be told. And then there's also characters out there that could be played by a disabled person, and I have absolutely no reason why you wouldn't do that. So I think it has to be both.
But if you decide to cast a disabled person in a role that was envisaged as an able-bodied person, you have to change that character quite substantially, don't you? Because
it depends what they're doing.
They will be a different person.
It depends what they're doing, but I've always tackled writing as you find the character and then you add the disability, because I feel like I'm a whole person who then is disabled. And I think that a lot of non-disabled writers will actually make the character all about the disability. Whereas actually, if you make them a rounded character anyway, somebody who's, an alcoholic, or somebody who's got a gambling problem, somebody who's a father, somebody, and then you add the layer of disability, it then becomes fascinating, because then what does that disability give you in addition? How will they now then tackle that situation? So I think, doing it that way around actually, it gives it a more authentic feel.
I mean, we're entering a massive recession in the creative industries as a result of coronavirus. And I know, with my own sort of obsessions around diversity and, BAME jobs in the industry, that, these are often areas that just get dropped as soon as the industry is in recession, because they just say, look, we just need the things that are going to get the maximum viewers, and most viewers aren't either black or disabled or gay or anything like that. So we just need to mainstream. Is that something you fear as we go into the next sort of year or two?
We don't fare well.
I mean, they don't say that, but that's what they do.
Oh, well,
they say that in their heads. Is what I mean.
Before this, we had a commissioner say that there's no market for disabled stories. And that was a senior commissioner. And I don't think that's true, but the fact that they thought that was true is quite alarming. So we already went into this with commissioners thinking that disability isn't really something that many people want to watch, despite the hundreds of Oscar winners and BAFTA winners that have all won for portrayals of disability, just not authentically. So it's always been critically successful, but when disabled people themselves are trying to tell their own narrative, somehow then it becomes, well, no one wants to see that. So I think in terms of recession, the disabled community struggles in every way, with support systems and things being rolled back. So I think that, but we have an opportunity to rebuild the industry and not rebuild the barriers. And that's what I've been trying to say. Like, if we come out of this and we rebuild the industry with the same barriers for everyone, then I think we've missed an absolutely huge opportunity to change, the world, really.
Do you think disabled people should only be played by disabled people?
Yes, I do. I didn't. I was trying to find that middle ground as having produced, of trying to say, yeah, but but no, I think it's, we've seen actors should be able to play everything, but there are a few exceptions, and we've seen that with different other minorities where it's just not acceptable for somebody to play different ethnic minorities, quite rightly so. But for disability, we seem to still be okay with that, and we seem to be able, but we need the star, to get the commission. Well, who's playing the supporting roles? And there's plenty of stars out there that have made movies that have tanked. So having a star in something is not an absolute guarantee of box office success. I think that all of those old things and old answers I think we've moved on. And I think
so. What do you think of the sort of the Daniel Day-Lewis, portrayal, or the Tom Cruise, or whoever it may be?
It's exactly the same as Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's. It's part of the history of representation, but it doesn't really have a place in our future. But at the moment, it's a little bit of a one-sided conversation, because the disabled community are saying, look, we find this offensive, and then yet you give them an award for it to say that it's excellent. And we need to move to a place where it doesn't happen. But in order to do that, you need the other half of the people to join that conversation and say, well, how are we going to do this? Because my biggest fear is that commissioners and channel execs would just go, well, we're just not going to do disability because it's too complicated.
How much of a lost decade do you think this has been since the Paralympics in 2012?
Yeah, I think that it has. We haven't really achieved exactly what we could have done, and I think that we've kind of, it feels to me like disability is gone all the way up to the kind of almost to the top of broadcasting, and then there it stopped. And we need to really kick the door down, and we need accountability for commissioners and channel heads in what they're commissioning. And I think until we have that, you're just not going to have, you've got to be looking at how many disabled people have you got on your board, because trickle-down economics arguably doesn't work, but trickle-down diversity really does. If you've got somebody that represents the community on that board, when you're having those discussions, they will put their hand up and go, so what about these people?
Can I ask you about your lockdown as well? How's that been? And are there aspects of lockdown for you as a disabled people that most of us won't have thought of?
It's been, I live in a little village outside Peterborough, so I literally go outside my door and there's alpacas and there's cows, and so it's been nice. I've realised that the way I worked was not healthy for me. I was spending too much time on the train down to London. I was burning myself out. I've had the best health I've had in my entire life in the last 3 months by just working remotely and keeping and not kind of pushing my body to limit. So I know I'll go out of this slightly different. But the disabled community, we were very, very upset about the triage list for who gets ventilators,
who gets treatment.
It came out with a little pictures alongside of somebody standing, then somebody with a walking stick, and then all the way down to somebody in a wheelchair alongside the triage kind of which by implication, if you didn't read the kind of notes, you would look and go, well, somebody in a wheelchair is less likely to get a ventilator. So the government altered that advice after the disabled community kind of went, we need some clarity. I think they said anyone under 65, that didn't apply. But this is where we're talking about indirect discrimination. It took the disabled community to actually go, this could severely cost lives unless you clarify it.
Is there any way in which you're more at a higher risk because of spina bifida, or are you just like everybody else?
I have asthma, so that's the main thing. So I'm at an increased risk, but my wife has a non-visible disability and she's actually in the highest kind of group. So the tricky things have been is that I can't go out and do like a weekly shop by myself as a wheelchair user. So there's been certain things that have been slightly tricky in terms of that. But on the whole, lockdown hasn't been too bad for us, and I've been able to actually work a lot from home, and I think it's just going to reset how I work in the future. And I'm going to be a little bit better to actually be able to flag up that I need to remote work as much as possible. Obviously with the acting you can't do that, but with the writing and the producing of kind of content you can. So I think I'm going to be a little bit more okay. I've had this thing throughout my life of not really wanting to be a problem and not wanting to say things that make you tricky in any way. But I think just by saying that can I remote work as much as possible should be a completely reasonable thing to say now.
And did you feel, and did other disabled people feel that had you fallen ill, you would have got the right treatment, or did you feel that you would be put on a heap of people who are lower priority because of underlying conditions?
This is the absolute essence of why it's so important that society has a good grip on the lives of disabled people, because we've had reports before this where disabled people have had DNR put on their file, and if you've got an unconscious bias that disability is a weakness and that disabled people have no value in society, you're more likely to kind of go, well, yeah, we're just going to be compassionate and let them go, they've had a good innings kind of thing. And so there's a really scary if a lot of society have a completely warped view of disability, but through unconscious bias that can completely change how they handle people, especially in a pandemic. So it's really brought all of that to the forefront to go. It's vitally important that we continue to be allowed by media to show authentic, true disability, because you look at the life of Ruth Madeley, like an exceptional actress. 100%, once you've seen her work, you go, well, no, you do everything you can to save Ruth.
Are you able to think about the scenario in which your parents could have stopped you having spina bifida?
So yeah, that's available now. You could have the operation to minimise it, but the abortion rates of babies with spina bifida, I think it's 80% in the UK. So mine is one of those conditions that we're seeing less and less of. But in third world countries, we're seeing more and more of, because they don't have those screening processes. So I think we're kind of rocketing towards having like 10 billion people on the planet. And if 20% of the population are seen as a burden or seen with absolutely zero value, that's a perfect storm happening in terms of human rights abuses and just our thinking about who we are and who, the kind of world we want to live in.
But is there a right or a wrong in terms of how to respond if you're a parent and you're told your child has spina bifida, we can do something about it? Do you want to do something about it or not? Where do you stand on that?
The question is how that is framed to the parents, because in that moment, it would be the doctor saying, "Look, I can't give you any guarantees," and how the doctor frames the choice that they now have is vitally important. So I'm more concerned with the experience and the possible unconscious bias that a doctor might have in that situation when delivering quite hard information to parents, because they could very easily skew that decision either way. And I think that we need to be very careful in not projecting any of our own thoughts about disability in that situation to these vulnerable parents, because it is a horrific situation that I don't think any parent would ever want to be in. And like you say, there's no right or wrong. There is a right and wrong way of framing the advice and support in that moment. And I think that's the important thing.
I mean, as you say, as science marches on, there are a lot of disabilities that can effectively be screened out.
Yeah.
Or cured before birth. Is that is that a good thing? That the 20% becomes 10% or 5% or 2%.
Well, this is what I'm currently co-directing a documentary about it with the support of the Wellcome Trust, and writing a book on it, because it's hugely complicated. I think that when you're looking at the most hardest disabilities, where there's literally nothing but suffering and no quality of life, as human beings, yes, we should probably be doing all that we can to ensure that no one ever has to suffer like that. But there is a sliding scale between that and actually going, well, we just don't want cerebral palsy anymore. And there's a big kind of scale, and there's not really an open, honest conversation about it, which is what we're trying to do with the documentary, is just explore it and say, look, like I've done in all of my other work, we need to create a safe space where we can talk about this, because essentially what we're talking about is eugenics, and we need to openly discuss where the line is between scientific progress and eugenics, because there'll be things that we all agree are completely reasonable, and there'll be things that we think are way past the point of, going to genetically modified humans, that we kind of think, well, that's not reasonable.
But it's the stuff in between that's tricky, isn't it? Where you draw the line.
And I think we need a greater discussion about it.
So if you could change the world in any way, wave a magic wand, how would you change it?
I think I would just have a greater compassion. I would have everyone having a little bit more of a compassion for other people and empathy, because I think we kind of tend to instinctively kind of go inside ourselves and think about ourselves. And I think that the more we look at the world with compassion and empathy, the more you can recognize that everyone's struggling in something, even those people that you probably think, oh God, I really hate that person. They have a life struggle that's probably generating that the way they are.
Well, David Proud, thank you very much indeed for sharing your ways to change the world. Before we go, how do we watch the film in these strange times where we can't go to the cinema?
It's on Google Play, iTunes, on Curzon On Demand and the BFI player, and it's under the compilation called The Uncertain Kingdom.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, then please do give us a rating and a review. You can watch all of these Ways to Change the World interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Our producer is Rachel Evans. Until next time, bye-bye.